A conservative nonprofit is targeting some of the nation's most powerful chief executives. As we reported earlier this week, it's launching an ad campaign to fight what it calls woke capitalism, calling out the CEOs of the likes of American Airlines, Coke, Nike. The ads will run on CNBC, Fox Business, local stations. Join us now is the head of this group, Will Hild, executive director of Consumers Research. Well, I want to start just by pointing out Consumers Research is really one of the oldest consumer advocacy groups in the country, founded in 1929 and during the Depression in the 30s to educate consumers about some of the bad things that were happening with products. But then in 1981, you expanded from a product-focused organization to one that considers the effects of laws, regulations, and government programs on consumers. So I guess that's what this latest thing falls under. You are loath to identify anyone who's funding it, but my question, maybe you will for us, but if not, my question is, did a group or a number of groups come to you with this campaign, or did you come up with the campaign yourself and then raise the money to do it?
Well, as you noted, we're the nation's oldest consumer protection organization. We have a mission to educate and speak up for consumers on these issues. We developed this campaign because we saw increasingly companies trying to distract from their mistreatment of customers in the marketplace, problems with their supply chains being tainted with potentially forced labor like Nike and Coca-Cola. And we thought it was time that someone stood up for the consumer.
I think I read during Eamon's report that you thought that a lot of CEOs were getting a license to virtue signal. And we know the virtue signaling is usually on one side of the aisle is where a lot of it comes from. And you thought they weren't being called on it, and that there has to be, I guess, the hypocrisy of some of the things that go on with that company. But it's a weird thing to decide to take. It seems like it just adds more fire to the culture wars. If on the one side it's bad that they're so woke and letting everyone know about it, but then to come at them from the other side, you're just, it's just like throwing gasoline on the whole fire, and the culture wars get heated up, and I don't know, can't we all just get along, Will?
No one gave these CEOs a license. What happened is they decided they wanted to distract from their failures. Take CEO of American Airlines, Doug Parker, for example. He's driven that airline into a state of disrepair. It was just rated the nation's worst airline by Wall Street Journal. They lose the most bags. They kick the most passengers off of their flights. And we were able to confirm by reaching out to them that during the COVID pandemic, they continued to decrease legroom on many of their flights. And this is, of course, at a time when American Airlines has taken a multi-billion-dollar taxpayer bailout. And CEO Doug Parker still got an 8-figure paycheck from that company. And so we just think it's time that they stop being allowed to distract from those things. Those are the things they should be answering for.
Seems like, Will, that's something you did after. Did American Airlines? I know that you think Coke during the Georgia law debate, you didn't like the stance that they took. So this was an answer to that. Why did there have to be the initial move of American? What did American Airlines do that raised your ire to then look into all these things? Why didn't you just look into all these things beforehand? It almost seems like a reprisal for something that they did, and now you're looking at companies to find things and targeting the ones that you didn't like because of they took the woke side on certain things.
Well, these companies are increasingly using positions in politics to distract from their own failures. They need to be focused on their own businesses and serving customers. And so that's the phenomenon that we saw.
Will you focus on other companies that didn't get woke or virtue signaling and do their commercial failings as well?
Absolutely.
It seems like you will.
Let me be very clear. The Consumer First Initiative has a very simple message. Not just these three companies, not just the problems with forced labor and CEOs getting taxpayer-funded paychecks. If you are a company and you are thinking right now, why don't we take a position on a political issue we have no expertise in to distract from our own failures and our own mistreatment of customers? We are coming after you. You are now on notice. So absolutely, this is an ongoing campaign, and we will be going after a lot of other companies if they continue to engage in this type of behavior.
But if they don't engage in that type of behavior, if they just are crappy companies, or you'll go after them too. They don't. It's not a payback.
We have a 91-year history. We have a 91-year history of speaking up for the consumer in the marketplace. And as you noted, we were founded on that principle and continued that. And so we were going to continue to do that, just like the Consumers First Initiative is doing for consumers today.
Hey, Will, I know that you're loath to disclose who your donors are, but don't you think from a purpose of transparency, in the same way that I think you want to improve, or you say you want to improve things at corporations, which also requires transparency, that you should be telling the public right now on this very program who's supporting this effort?
We have an ethical obligation to protect the privacy right of our donors, but I can tell you that every single one of our supporters is an American consumer, just like you and your viewers.
But clearly there's a political bent to what you're doing. So to some extent,
clearly there's a political and distraction bent to what these companies are doing.
That may very well be. And look, we can have a meaningful debate about whether there's virtue signaling going on here.
So we agree that these companies are distracting from what they're doing wrong.
I'm not sure. I think there's a debate about that as well. But I think that if you're going to come on television and attack companies, it's worth knowing who's attacking whom, don't you think? In the same way that we would want to know who's investing and backing certain companies, I would think that you'd be calling for that as well. Is it okay for companies and the investors behind those companies to hide in the shadows? I don't think that's okay either.
As I said, we have an ethical obligation to protect our supporters' right to privacy. But you mentioned transparency.
Don't you think that you have an You have an ethical obligation to protect your donors. Don't you think if you're going to come out publicly and make the statements you're saying, that you have an ethical obligation? Talk about ethical obligations. Don't you think you have an ethical obligation to tell the public where you stand, where you sit, and who's backing you? I mean, I don't even understand why we're having this conversation.
Well, as you just mentioned, you asked with transparency. We know where Doug Parker got his paycheck last year, and it was courtesy of the American taxpayer for running that airline into last place.
But, Will, I have no idea who's paying your paycheck. I don't know
Plenty
if you're being supported by a political party. I don't know if you're being supported by another airline. I don't know what's going on here.
We're an independent 501c3 who protects our supporters' right to privacy. But every single one of our supporters is an American consumer.
Okay. All right. We're not going to get anywhere with this, I don't think. Will, thank you. Who's next? You got three. How many total are you talking about? You're not going to do the whole S&P 500.
This is phase one. As I said, this is a phase one of an ongoing campaign. And like I said, any corporation right now that's thinking that they might be able to distract from their own mistreatment of customers or problems with forced labor tainting their production chain, you are now on notice. It's not going to work. And I'd be happy to come back and talk about phase two when we're ready to launch it.
Well, and we'll do that. All right. Thank you.
Great.